It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Hey guys, I'm back with Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. We read this novel in our AP Elaine class during my junior year, and I actually kind of found it amusing. A lot of my friends didn't like it as much, but I actually really like this book. Before I say anything, I first want to say that this is my first time reading British literature, I believe. So I'm not really familiar with like the British history or like the culture. So in our class, in our Lang class, we had to learn a lot about the history and background that's in this book, and that really matters. Such as if there's multiple children in a family, or if there's multiple girls in a family, the first girl has to get married first, and then the second, and then it's by age. Another thing that we had to learn was dancing. So at this time in the 1800s, when people danced with each other in Britain, it meant that they showed their affection for each other. So there's like this saying that like if you dance 3 times with a partner, then like you're getting married. So I know it sounds ridiculous right now, but in Britain at this time period, it was completely normal to get married after showing your affection only a few number of times. Now that I've introduced you to some of the background about this book, now I want to talk about the title. So, Pride and Prejudice. I think it's good if I just tell you what this means. So, Pride and Prejudice, I'm sure you all know the definition of the word for it, the dictionary definition, but actually Pride and Prejudice symbolize one person and, well, 2 people in this book. So Pride would be Mr. Darcy, and Prejudice would be Elizabeth Bennet. And this is very important to know because all of their attitudes, all of the stuff they say reflect on Mr. Darcy's pride and on Lizzie's prejudice. So at the beginning of the book, this man named Mr. Bingley comes into the town of the Bennets. The Bennets have 5 daughters. And all of these 5 daughters need to get married, but the first one is obviously Jane. So Mr. Bingley comes into town, and he's looking for a wife. And the Bennets are also looking for a husband that's rich and good-mannered and handsome. So the Bennets' mission is to get Jane married to Mr. Bingley, and Mr. Bingley wants to do the same. So throughout this book, you'll see that Mr. Bingley continues to share his affection for Jane, and so does she. But you'll find that the women in this book do not show their affection as much as the men, because in Britain at this time, it wasn't very common for women to express their feelings or express their affection for the opposite gender. Also, throughout this book, one thing that needs to be noted is that Mr. Bingley, there's this point where he kind of turns away from Jane. And that's when he finds that he can get a wife who's richer than Jane. Because the Bennets aren't very a rich family, they're quite middle-class poor. So Elizabeth Bennet, as I said before, is the second oldest of the Bennet family. And Mr. Darcy came into town. He is Mr. Bingley's best friend. So what happens is Mr. Darcy is a very prideful man. And he's very arrogant, he's rude, however he's extremely handsome and extremely rich. So he's the 2/3 guy. But Mr. Darcy, throughout the book, he finds himself to be in love with Elizabeth. However, Elizabeth has a lot of prejudice. So if she doesn't like someone's first impression, then she'll probably never like them again. So as you read the book, you'll see that Mr. Darcy keeps on trying to approach her, but Elizabeth is just like, no, and she keeps shutting the doors on him. Throughout the book, Darcy and Elizabeth fight a lot, and they're all about either Elizabeth's prejudice or about Darcy's pride. So if you look closely into the conversation, then you'll find that. One thing that made it kind of hard to read the book smoothly was that Jane Austen didn't put who's saying what for each dialogue. So she'll say it maybe like the top of a page and then like the end of the next page. It's because these dialogues are very long, but it'll just indent and then have a dialogue, indent and have a dialogue, but it doesn't say who's saying what. So what I did was I bought my own book and I wrote down next to each dialogue who's saying what so I don't get confused. And I think that helped me understand the book a lot more because some of my friends didn't do that. They used the school copy, and they got really confused as who's saying what because in a lot of situations there's more than two people talking. So then you have to kind of figure it out with who talked before, who talks after, and who's being addressed in the quote. And it's actually kind of I don't want to say fun, but it's an interesting progress trying to figure out who's saying what, because as you're saying that, you're learning more about the characters and you're learning more about the personalities, so you understand the book even more. Back to the plot. One day, this man named Mr. Collins and this man named Mr. Wickham come into the Bennett's town. And Mr. Wickham is a very, very handsome man. He's very, extremely handsome. And all of the 5 girls are like, whoa, like, that man is like gorgeous. But out of all them 5, Lydia, the youngest, falls in love with Wickham. And Wickham realizes that, so they kind of run off. And this really is a big violation of like the British like norms at that time, because like you never run off with a stranger from your family, especially the youngest one, never. And I know it's really not common here either, but it was like extremely not okay to do that. But Lydia did because she was that much in love with Wickham. Alright, it's time for me to wrap up this book review. One thing that I want you guys to note is keep track of Elizabeth's prejudice throughout this entire book, because you'll find a lot of it. And keep track of Darcy's pride too. It comes out really strong the second he enters the book. So keep an eye out on that. And one thing that you'll find really ironic is that Elizabeth and Darcy, who hated each other in the beginning, eventually end up getting married. Now, I felt like it was kind of like a Korean drama plot, because this always happens. Like, you meet someone at like a restaurant, or like you meet someone really badly, and then something happens and you have to keep talking to them. And then eventually you keep talking to them and you realize that they're a better person than you thought they were. So, and then you end up liking that person, you end up dating, and then you eventually end up getting married. This is exactly like a Korean drama. But the actual reason why Elizabeth started to fall in love with Darcy was not because he was it was not because that she actually built affection for him. It kind of like sparked when Wickham and Lydia were getting married, and Wickham needed the money from the Bennet family to get married to Lydia, but they didn't have that kind of money. So Darcy, who's really rich, he gave that money for Wickham and Lydia to marry. And then Elizabeth was like, oh my god, you saved my sister, like, thank you so much. And then she realizes that Darcy isn't the arrogant, prideful person that she thought he was. So in reality, we don't actually know if Darcy is the prideful, arrogant person that he appears to be in this book, because it might just be all from the perspective of Elizabeth's prejudice. I hope you guys enjoyed this book.